Wow, hi guys, welcome back to the High Mind podcast. It is currently 12 past 6 in the evening on Friday the 14th of April. Thanks for joining us again. It's episode 33 today.
That's right.
That is right, yeah. How are we doing today, Pete? Good to be back in person.
Yeah, it always is. Always good to have an in-person episode.
Yeah.
It gets a bit online with the latency. It
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
a bit annoying sometimes, so it's always a little bit smoother in person.
Yeah, get the body language a bit more communicable.
A bit more intimate.
Yeah, well. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. But yeah, so today's episode we're going to be talking about, I was going to say nothing in particular. We've got a few talking points, but there's no real overarching theme too in depth, but kind of different things we've both thought of and go through them, I guess. But I guess there is a sort of an overarching theme. We're going to talk about Stoicism, like 4 virtues, what they are, and kind of rank order them maybe. It might not be like a definitive list that we'll agree on for the rest of our lives, but we'll talk about them and talk about things that we've heard about in the world that happened recently and kind of use those as examples and, I don't know, go from there, I guess.
Yeah, sounds good.
Should we get straight into it then?
Yeah, let's do it.
So topic, Stoicism, we talked about in the past. There's 4 overarching kind of virtues that most Stoics would kind of believe are the fundamentals of Stoicism, I guess. Those being courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance. I've heard from someone online that I think Marcus Aurelius believed that justice was the most important one. That should be like held in the highest order almost. But should we kind of discuss what each of them mean as a brief introduction to them, and then kind of talk about our initial list, and then maybe go through what we'll discuss today, and then see if our list changes at the end.
Yeah. Let's do it. So, starting with which one do you
want? Starting with wisdom, I think that might be the easiest. It's the classic Stoic belief that you need to understand what's inside your control, what's outside of control, care about the things that are in your control, because that's what you have responsibility for, and kind of not disregard the things that are outside of your control, but I guess stop worrying about stuff that you can't change. That kind of comes with wisdom, and I think that's what wisdom is as an overarching idea. That is what Stoicism is to me. Would you agree that?
Yeah, that's interesting because I agree with what you said there, and I think that is a wise way of viewing the world. But in terms of wisdom as a concept, I'd say that is a wise idea that you just said, but I don't think that's exactly the definition of what wisdom is. So I'd say what wisdom is, it could just be any kind of lessons that you learn over your lifetime, and I think it's about learning lessons from experience and kind of having a better perspective on the world based on your experience, and perhaps combining knowledge and things you've learned off other people and also in your experience. And I think what wisdom does is gives you the ability to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to make better decisions throughout your life, then yeah, I think that's a sign of wisdom. And so what you said there in terms of, you know, the general Stoic ideas of realizing what's in your control or what's outside your control, I think that's definitely a wise thing, and you're likely to make better decisions. But I think as a broader concept, wisdom kind of means what those, you know, wisdom is an overarching as an overarching definition. Wisdom would include all kind of lessons you learn, which maybe I say make better decisions. Do you think that's a good definition, or is there other elements to wisdom other than just decisions in terms of judgment in any other way?
When I think of wisdom, I remember the sort of way that someone said it in our secondary school. He said, one of the teachers said something like, being smart is knowing that is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but being wise is knowing that it doesn't go in a fruit salad.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuck with me. It's a little bit silly, but it kind of makes sense. But I would agree with you, wisdom kind of comes down to going through life and learning what works for you and applying what works and making sure you try to avoid what doesn't work. I think that's kind of what it would encompass altogether. It's hard to say what wisdom is, because like some people would say wisdom comes with age, but then you meet some really not smart, but just really wise people. If you were to think of a wise person, would there kind of be what kind of like attributes do you think they'd have?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like the archetypal image of a wise person is like an old man.
Mm.
That's how it's kind of represented in all movies and stories. Is this like old? Even like one that comes to mind is Master Yoda
Oh
in
yeah,
Star
yeah.
Wars. Like he's this old wise person,
Mm.
and I suppose with age it comes experience, and throughout your lifetime you will acquire experiences, and that is maybe a precursor to become wise, but it doesn't make you wise in and of itself. It's about actually learning from those experiences and applying knowledge, which kind of takes active effort. And perhaps more than anything, it's about taking on challenges. And because through those challenges, that's where you learn and you're able to build this applied knowledge. Whereas if you spent your entire time just going through books and stuff, like you'll learn lots of knowledge, you might say, but you won't have that practical understanding of how it applies in the world, and a practical understanding which helps you make good decisions. So yeah, I think that's a key characteristic of becoming wise would probably be taking on a lot of challenges, and that probably
Yeah, I think
comes
that's
with age.
fair. Because like, I don't think, well, in the movies of Star Wars anyway, it's not really like understood just from the movies what Yoda's like previous life like encompassed and stuff. But you can imagine it was like a lot of hard fought battles and, like you said, a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like another one that comes to mind is Kung Fu Panda's. Is it Master Shifu or something? And they just seem so, when they get to like that level of wisdom, they seem so calm and like collected.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of know from the movies and like TV shows or whatever you see them in that they just were ferocious warriors at one point, taking on those challenges like you were saying. But I'm just don't know. Like, would you say that it's kind of almost not impossible, but really highly improbable that a young person can be really wise? Like, you can fit a lot of experience in a shorter amount of time if you do try, but you are limited by time. Like, you do need to extend the period of time to get even more experience.
Yeah.
So is it limiting? Is it kind of hard for someone very young to become that wise?
Yeah, it's a great question. With that, it kind of seems like my initial thoughts is that certain things come to different people easier, and there might just be a young person that just seems to kind of get life and they understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But a part of me feels for a young person, it maybe wouldn't be considered wisdom, and I think perhaps as a young person you will inevitably have gaps in your knowledge which kind of take away from your wisdom. Do you think it's possible to be wise as a young person, or is there a limit to that?
I think there is a limit, because especially if you're below the age of 18, you're not self-sufficient, and without the experience of being self-sufficient and like truly independent, you're not going to be able to understand what life's about in terms of like that context. And saying that, like, there's still like, especially nowadays, people aren't necessarily self-sufficient until they're like mid-20s because of like the housing market, and like you're not really able to move out of your house. And even if you move out of your house, people are looking up where their parents still help out and stuff. And so that's sometimes I think about, like, would it be better if all parents kind of threw their children out to the world with their hand up but not a hand out, and like kind of left them to their own devices? Seems a bit cruel though at sometimes, but I think like that could maybe teach a lot of people a lot of things and make them wiser.
Yeah, it would put them through a lot of hardship and challenge compared to being sheltered. So I could see how that could build up wisdom. But I wouldn't necessarily say, because I could imagine a case where someone, let's say they do come from a privileged background, but if they were raised very well by their parents, even if their parents did help them out financially, if they were raised in a way that helped to build their character, then even if they had been rich their entire life, then they could still have this certain amount of humbleness if they were raised properly. Because I suppose that might be the issue, kind of. I mentioned like someone who's not wise might have gaps in their knowledge and their understanding of the world, and I suppose the risk for a rich kid would be that gap is not understanding kind of hardships of life and the things certain people go through. But I feel like if you're raised well, you wouldn't necessarily need to be thrown out onto the streets. Although that I feel like, you know, there is something to be said of, you know, if you were abandoned and you were forced to learn how to survive by yourself, that would be it'd be a difficult experience, but it'd be a lot of growth in that experience.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, back to the question though. I think there would be an upper limit. I think there would be an upper limit to like the wisdom you can get, because although like the young person could, like you said, read and take this knowledge from other people's experiences, the only way to know if that theory works for you is to put it into practice. And like when you're young, you just don't have the time to put all those different like things into practice, because you have to wait until you get older, have a mortgage, or start your own business, or have kids, and this and that. But then also, I guess, like when you get older, the challenges that you face in life fundamentally change. Like as a person our age, the challenges that we face are kind of quite minimal compared to someone that's 5 years older, where they live by themselves and they have to like, they're saving up to get a mortgage, or they're saving up to invest in the business and stuff. And then like 5 years after that, they might start to raise kids, and those challenges are just completely different and nuanced to the ones that we face today, and 5 years time, and then 15, 20 years time. So I guess wisdom, is there even a limit to wisdom, or could it go on forever?
It seems as if it could probably go on forever. And you think about what religious figures represent, that perhaps they'd represent what God would represent is like an ultimately wise being, which would be the ideal. But kind of inherently as humans, we're not able to, you know, you can never reach the limit of the capacity in probably any trait. And you know that I think the same applies for wisdom. It's interesting how you know, we mentioned a couple of these people, Master Yoda or Master Shifu, how these people really do have that kind of stoic way about them that you were talking about at the start, that they're very kind of calm and collected, and they have great emotional control. Because initially you kind of said that would be the definition of wisdom, whereas I kind of saw wisdom as a broader understanding of the world, which could apply in kind of a broader way. But do you think perhaps having that broader understanding of the world does directly lead you to be that more stoic person who's calmer and has better emotional control?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it would. I think with that like experience and knowledge of like how the world works, you start to understand where you fit into that world, and I think you start to understand what's within your control and what's not. And then because you know that so wholeheartedly after years of experience, you just become more content with, okay, this is where I am, I might as well just be happy and relax and take it as it is, rather than like shout out to the world and be resentful and stuff or whatever. But yeah, I would say up to a certain point, that's like kind of where you get to.
Yeah. Perhaps what wisdom is your outlook on the world, moving closer to the truth and to kind of the proper way of being, which might be defined as the way of being which gives you the most optimal life. And obviously, you know, what an optimal life is going to heavily depend on your value system. But it does seem like, for example, being non-reactive to events in the outside world and having this sense of calm about you, that's something that wise people will have in general, because perhaps that is the truth and that is the proper way of being. And through gaining wisdom, they become more like that. So perhaps wisdom in general is kind of an understanding of the truth in terms of how to live your life properly, and just the truth in the way you understand the world, to be truthful without a kind of, you know, gaps or less misunderstandings about the way the world actually works.
Would you say it's kind of like the removal of your own bias as well?
Yeah, that seems like a good definition as well, because I suppose your own biases blind you to the truth.
Yeah.
But perhaps what wisdom is ultimately knowing the truth and being able to live by it.
Mm. Yeah. Do you think you could be a wise person? Like, to be a wise person, do you kind of need to act wisely? Like, an example could be like, everyone knows that you shouldn't necessarily get angry at someone and like kind of flip out on them and like berate them verbally or whatever. I might get into a situation where someone antagonizes me and I want to do that. As a wise person, I would know not to do that, but then I still do it anyway. But I'm wise enough, let's say, to know that I shouldn't have done it, but I still did it. Does wisdom kind of come through actions as well, rather than just knowledge?
I think it does. I think to be a wise person, it needs to be embodied in your actions, because it. I think if it's not embodied in your actions, then it's not. You don't really believe it if you don't act it out.
Right.
You don't believe it's strong enough, or it's not. You know, it's not necessarily aligned with the way you internally understand the world. But I suppose even a wise person could um, lose their temper, for example. But I would say that the ultimate wise person wouldn't do that. And if someone could be still wise and make a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that that mistake would take away from their wisdom. It wouldn't be a wise thing to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think in order to be truly someone with wisdom, and particularly going back to why it's a Stoic virtue, I think a lot of what Stoicism comes, a lot of the importance of Stoicism is in your actions. Kind of, regardless how you feel, you take the proper actions. So to kind of not act, to be wise in your head theoretically, but not to act that out, I think kind of goes against why it would be a Stoic virtue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, it was an interesting thing you said there about should you directly pursue being wise, and this question kind of came from my head myself when thinking about it. So we spoke about how perhaps being wise, but perhaps having this calm nature about you and being non-reactive is a byproduct of being wise. But perhaps, you know, in the beginning, it might not be the best thing to, like, should you focus so much in the beginning when you're trying to become wise on, for example, being calm, and stuff like that? Or should your focus be more on taking on challenges in the world, which will kind of demand you to improve and force you into that? Because I think nowadays,
Right.
obviously, Stoicism's become a very popular thing. Like on the internet, a lot of people talk about it, and they talk about different Stoic practices and mindsets. And I definitely believe those could be helpful, but perhaps you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, and the way you attain those things is by taking on challenges in the world, and that's how you gain the wisdom, which ultimately makes you a calmer person.
Yeah, they're the
Whereas
byproducts.
people want that. Do you think people want that end result too quickly, or in the beginning, is it good to focus on that, having that Stoic mindset?
It's a difficult one. I feel like there's a chance that people might try and pursue that state of being and those virtues, and like try and embody those virtues more. So they'll focus on that than, like you said, taking on challenges where they become like self-actualized and like are the best version of themselves. Although those two things kind of go hand in hand, and it's kind of the same thing. I think people might want to focus on how to incorporate these virtues and embody them, because it gives them an excuse to not focus on doing really well at school, or like working really hard at their job and getting promoted, or setting their own business up. I don't know if that is true though, but like, do you think people could do that? Maybe they want to get this sense of well-being, whereas that's not necessarily important in terms of when you're younger. Maybe it's more important to self-actualize and like produce something for the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a really good question, and perhaps if you're, I suppose the problem we're trying to highlight here is if you simply try and embody these Stoic virtues, for example, you might just be acting like a wise person rather than actually being a wise and
Right.
virtuous person.
Yeah.
But perhaps it might be a situation of fake it till you make it, and having and embodying the actions and in the beginning you kind of are an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that's something which happens whenever you take on a new challenge. At a certain point, you are going to have to pretend that you are something that you're not, or else you'll never be able to become that thing if you never take a step in the direction of acting it out. So
I think that's true probably for everything. Like jiu-jitsu, you roll for the first time ever, and you're shit. You don't understand how to move your body, but you need to act like you do. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to roll with someone. You'll just have to sit there and ask, "Oh, do I go this way? Do I go that way?" And it's like you're unrollable.
Yeah.
And then if you get into a new job, usually there's a few months of training, isn't there?
Mm.
But when you go into a new job, you want to act like you know it.
Yeah.
To show initiative.
Yeah.
Is there an example of something where you just have you just are completely honest and have no knowledge, and you express that?
I feel like being vulnerable with the fact that you're incompetent, if you are incompetent, is the proper way to be. But I feel like pretending, like we were saying there, the value of pretending to be something or acting like you are something before you become it. And I don't think that necessarily has to come with deluding yourself or other people that you are something that you're not. But I think it's perhaps just an essential part of transformation. Is it's not necessarily deluding people, but you are having to act in a certain way before you become the thing. And this is something actually, so we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago about atomic habits and how there's different levels of habits, different levels of, you know, the way you see yourself and the reason you take different actions.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is your identity, which is supposedly the strongest thing. And there's two others. I can't remember exactly what they were, but one of them's like your habits or your actions or something. But basically, what it is the strongest way in order to reinforce a new habit is to believe you're the type of person that does this habit.
Yeah.
But you know, at a certain level before that, the way you build that up is through it. In Atomic Habits, he talks about the systems of taking the daily actions that sort of person would take.
Yeah.
And then eventually that builds your identity into the type of person that would do that. So I suppose coming back to the original point, that with trying to become a wise person, you do need to act like a wise person before you know actually are able to be one, because you need to build those habits and build the identity. So yeah, overall I do think it is beneficial to try and pursue the virtues directly. And that doesn't mean, obviously it's important that you take on the challenges in the world, and you have actual real world goals, but the ideal situation would be to pursue these real world goals and do your best to embody the virtues, even if you're not necessarily that person yet.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, because that ideal directs your actions, even if it's not necessarily something that's completely true, factual. If you don't have that ideal, you're not going to be able to go the right way. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. You don't want to take that too far, because I think, like, what do you think the danger would be in that attitude of fake it till you make it, pretending you are something you're not? Because it definitely seems like there is some danger in living in that way.
An overestimation of your competence will lead to failure, and it could lead to like extraordinary failure. Like if you're, I don't know, if somehow you get to like become a board of director, like part of the board of directors for a company, and you're just not qualified to be there in any sort of way, you're going to direct the company in the wrong direction, and it could fail. But then saying that though, I feel like other people are your checks and balances, and other people around you won't necessarily allow you to get to a level where you have that responsibility and carry that risk.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really think of if there is a problem with it.
I think you actually phrased it perfectly there, as overestimating your own competence. And perhaps, you know, you say in an ideal situation, and you mentioned there getting onto like a board of directors in a company, in a well-functioning company, people around you wouldn't let you to get to that point of power if you didn't have the competence to go along with it. But yeah, I think that is definitely the danger, is an overestimation of your own competence, leading you to perhaps take on responsibilities which maybe taking on responsibilities beyond what you're capable of isn't inherently a bad thing, but it certainly comes a risk, particularly if you don't understand your own competence. Like, an example that comes to mind, that Jordan Peterson's pretty heavily criticised Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, because basically the argument is he kind of got into this political position because
his father.
Yeah, his father was a significant political figure, and realistically, you look at his life, and he has not got the experience to back up the position that he's in.
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson thinks, he probably shouldn't have taken that role. And yeah, he tries to empathise with him in terms of, like, okay, perhaps he's been told that he needs to run for this role, or the other party are going to come into power, and he doesn't want that, and perhaps even though he's not competent now, he could rise to that level,
right?
So he's given the devil his due, so to speak. But yeah, that seems to be, that's an example that comes to mind of someone who's managed to get into a position of power who didn't necessarily have the experience to go with it. And a lot of people are criticizing some of the actions he's taken, and ultimately that may lead back to him overestimating his competence and pretending to be something you're not. So I suppose in this fake it till you make it type of thing, you should fake it till you make it in terms of doing your best to embody the ideals which you aspire to be like. However, you need to have a certain level of humbleness as well, where you don't overestimate your own competence and you don't become deluded in the process that you are something you're not. So I think perhaps that's where a level of humbleness needs to be accompanied with this attitude of faking it till you make it.
And that comes with your wisdom, isn't it? Being humble.
Yeah, I suppose that comes with wisdom. If you have a certain understanding of the world, then you'll realise, oh, I'm not better than everyone. Like being humble is realising that you're not better than you don't think you're better than you actually are.
Yeah.
And you talk about how wisdom comes about, and taking on challenges in the world is how you realise that there's people that are far better than you at things, or you might not be as competent as you think you are because you fail, and that's a form of building up wisdom. So yeah, certainly humbleness is probably part of wisdom as well.
Yeah, it seems like all the good virtues would fall under wisdom. Well, to be a truly wise person, do they always encompass all the other positive virtues? Or can someone be like a really mean old person, or just a mean person, but still be really wise?
Yeah, it's a good question. Perhaps maybe it'd be good to kind of talk about the other virtues before comparing them. But to kind of summarize, what we've gathered here, what wisdom is, I'd say it's having an understanding of the world which is based in the truth, and not being deluded. And then, like you said, if that comes with a certain level of, that seems to always be correlated with being kind of calm and having this emotional stability and this kind of almost detachment, just a typical Stoic kind of the way an individual acts properly in the world. That would be embodying wisdom. Yeah,
so that's the first virtue that we talked about. The other three, so the next one, should we go on to courage?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So courage is something that we've all heard of. It's definitely something that you see in fucking movies all the time, and like bravery and stuff.
Braveheart.
Oh yeah, Braveheart, or Batman the Brave and Bold, little cartoon I used to watch when I was a kid. But yeah, I can't exactly remember what the Stoic definition of courage would be, but it would seem to me it's kind of involves risk taking, doing the right thing, even if it's difficult, and standing up for standing up for and living by your principles, maybe.
Yeah.
Would you say anything else is involved?
Yeah, I feel like my understanding of what courage is it's taking the action regardless of whether you're scared or not. I feel like that's the definition of bravery. I'm not sure if there's a difference between bravery and courage, whether those words mean a different thing. But I've heard it said about bravery that it's impossible to fake being brave, because what bravery is you take the action regardless of your fear.
Yeah, I think Sam Harris talked about that, didn't he?
Sam Harris, and I've heard Jocko and Chris Williamson also, I think, discuss this idea. But to be brave is to take the action regardless of how you feel, so it's impossible to fake. And I feel like that's what courage is as well. So, we mentioned that to be a wise person, you need to take the actions, but perhaps wisdom is to have the knowledge and understanding, and then courage is to be able to take the actions regardless of if you're scared or if there's negative consequences for yourself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, it's interesting. I saw Sam Harris talk about it. He said you can fake like nearly every emotion, but like you said, you can't fake being brave.
Yeah.
Do you think bravery... Do you think every time someone's brave, there almost needs to be an inherent fear inside them? Because if I was to say, like, let's say there was just hypothetically like a group of 4 people who were like invaders or whatever, and I was just not scared of them, and I went up to them and just like fought them to the death, even if I died, I wasn't scared. Would you say that's brave compared to someone who was scared of those 4 people but still went and fought? Like, did I have bravery, or because I wasn't scared, is it even brave to take on that challenge if I'm not scared?
Yeah, I kind of lean towards the side of if you're not scared to do it, then it's not bravery.
Yeah, I'd think I'd go that way as well.
Yeah, I think that is something essential. That's people sometimes say like it's difficult to tell the difference between being courageous and being stupid. And I suppose, it's tough. I think, but yeah, to answer that question simply, I do think in order to be brave, it needs to overcome fear. If you're not scared, then it's not a brave action. It might be still the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do if you're taking on a difficult challenge which you're not scared of. But in order for it to be classed as bravery or courage, I think, there is an overcoming fear which is essential to that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. Because it wouldn't be courageous for someone to do something that's completely easy for them, is it?
No.
Although it might seem courageous to other people and they call it courageous.
Yeah, it's difficult to say, because the same action for 2 different people, you might describe it as a courageous action, but even if the 2 people do the exact same, for one of them it was a courageous action, and for the other person who's not scared, you would have to say it's not a courageous action, even though it was the same action they did.
Yeah, it's different emotional states from 2 different people.
Yeah.
Do
you think there's more to courage then? So that's, is that the most fundamental level that courage is overcoming fear, or is it also being able to overcome more than fear or is there a more fundamental definition? Perhaps what courage is to be able to take an action when the outcome is not guaranteed. Maybe that's a better definition.
Yeah,
because I think it's a courageous action to do something if you don't know. Yeah, like I said, I don't know how I can exactly elaborate on that. Like, if it's an action that you don't know what the outcome is, I suppose that would induce fear because there's a certain level of uncertainty. But perhaps fear
you might not
is secondary to it.
You might not be scared of either outcome though, because you might be so stoic that you might just think, even if it's the bad outcome, like Jocko says, good, just carry on. So maybe there isn't a fear involved in that. So maybe courage can involve maybe courage doesn't always have to involve fear, but like you said, it's taking action without knowing if the guaranteed consequence is what you want.
Yeah, or even maybe it's knowing that there is a potential for a consequence for things to not go your way.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're just an extreme person that really embodies Stoicism, and you were going off to war or something, and you knew there was a chance you were going to die, but you weren't scared, because even though you might die, you just got to such a level in your mind where you completely accepted that, and you were willing to die for the cause. Like, you wouldn't necessarily be scared, but it'd probably still be a courageous thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be a courageous thing to do. Yeah, what comes? I remember I started watching another TV show. It's like an anime thing, and it's like about Vikings. And there's this village, and they don't have to go to war, but all the men decide to go to war because if they do, they can secure these goods, and the village will flourish. But his wife's like, "Oh, you shouldn't go to war. We can survive. We don't need the stuff to make the village better. We're sustaining ourselves fine." But he's doing it for the kids and the wife and the whole village so they can become better. But it's not guaranteed that he's going to make it out alive. And she's like, "We just need you to come back. You don't need the riches to come back." But it's courageous for him to do that. Would you say? Or is it stupid?
It could be stupid, and yeah, it's difficult in specific situations. If he goes, yeah, I don't know. I think, like, that's a really tough one, because it can something still be courageous if you go and do something you are afraid to do. Is that still courageous? Even because I suppose you only know if it's stupid or not afterwards. If it goes your way, then it wasn't stupid. But if it doesn't, then people might call it stupid. But
that's true.
I suppose, that would almost be. It depends how essential it was to the values he had. So, like, I think about, they might have been living in this village, and they could, survive without these riches, but they'd live a very difficult life, or they might have their freedom restricted. It makes me think of Braveheart. Like, he could have continued living if he decided, just to
accept his fate.
And let this English dude bang his wife. Like, if he just let that happen, then he could have carried on, but it's no way to live, is it? So in his principles, he even though he could have survived otherwise, in order to live in accordance with his values, then he needed to do the courageous thing, which ultimately led to him being killed. But it's a great story about kind of standing up to your values and being willing to sacrifice everything for that. So for that person, but if the motivation for getting those riches is simply out of greed, when you could live a perfectly reasonable and morally sound life in accordance with your values, then it would maybe be a silly thing to do. But potentially you could still define it as courageous if you're scared to do it and you do it anyway.
I think another caveat I didn't mention earlier, but will maybe sway your decision, is the man said, if we don't go and secure these, I think it was like some natural resources like iron.
Yeah.
If we don't go secure this, someone else will, and then they'll have power near us and they'll want to take over us.
Yeah.
So it was almost a defense.
Yeah.
Which is maybe more.
I suppose acceptable. At that point, it's a judgment call, which is based on your wisdom. But if it would be possible if you weren't the wisest person, and you make the wrong call on that one, but you still you weigh out what's good, whether it's worth doing, and a better strategic plan for long-term benefits, and to ultimately live in line with your values in the long term would be to not go to war. But perhaps you're not wise enough and you make the incorrect decision now and you decide to go to war. I'd say it's still courageous. So even if that wisdom comes in to guide your decisions, but perhaps courage, how courage relates, is having the conviction to execute your decisions, even if they make you scared.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then wisdom kind of comes after that, because it's all like hindsight, isn't it, and all that.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, in the beginning, if you were wise, you'd be able to make a better decision, and then you go through that difficult experience, and then afterwards you gain more wisdom. So they go back and forth almost.
Yeah.
But perhaps in order to get courage, in order to get wisdom, you need courage. So perhaps courage needs to come first, because in the beginning, if you're not willing to take on challenges, then you have no way of gaining wisdom. Whereas
there's no opportunity for growth.
Yeah, there's no preconditions almost for courage. You just have to do the thing that you're scared to do. That's the only precondition. Whereas with wisdom, it takes time, but you need to go through challenges. So we'll get into comparing.
Yeah, because you can just be courageous your whole life and not gain any wisdom, because you don't have any real perspective on looking back at your life. And you can always be courageous, but you can't always be wise without that courage.
Yeah,
initially.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I think we've defined courage pretty well there.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the temperance next?
Yeah, temperance, perfect.
What do you think temperance means?
So my understanding of temperance in terms of Stoicism and stuff is like, it's kind of taking what's needed and having the ability to not give in to impulses and overindulge. Yeah, I think that's the simplest way I understand it, is not overindulging. There's like, I don't know where it comes in. I don't know if it's like a samurai thing or a Japanese thing, like always eat to 80% fullness. I know that's like a thing that some class of people did in the past, and it's still like replicated today by people. But yeah, I think temperance kind of is understanding the impulses you have and not giving in to them when you have them, and just not indulging yourself in these like different caveats of life, whether it's food, drink. Modern day would be like going on your phone and stuff like that. Would you agree? Or
yeah, well, to be fair, I haven't heard too much people talk about temperance, so I didn't really know what it means. But obviously, like the word temper is in terms of anger, so temperance to control your anger, but it obviously goes for other impulses.
Control your urges, maybe.
Yeah, control, and yeah. So I suppose it's interesting because we talk about these different things, and I feel like they all kind of come under wisdom. So a wise person would do all these things, but perhaps that means, wisdom might be more focused on knowledge and understanding, whereas, we spoke about what courage is, and then what temperance is. It's more to do with your actions. Would you agree? Wisdom is more.
Yeah.
Wisdom's more about your knowledge and understanding of the world. And then these other virtues are more about the actions.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, the wisdom's kind of more an internal mindset and stuff, whereas the other ones are, what do you do externally that the world sees? Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, but anyway, back to temperance. So the ability to control impulses and not indulge. Would you say it's kind of analogous to what in the modern day we call discipline?
Yeah, I think discipline comes into it. I wouldn't say it embodies discipline completely, because I think the difference would be maybe, like we said, like discipline is kind of getting up, doing the things you need to do, even if you don't want to do them. Whereas I feel like temperance kind of is similar to that, but it's more so about not doing things that you want to do for the sake of doing them.
Yeah. It's like the other side to it.
Yeah.
Like discipline's maybe a broader term, because it'd be disciplined to, for example, to not overindulge is a disciplined thing to do.
To stop yourself.
But discipline also means the other side of things, doing things that you don't feel like doing in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, to temperance, controlling your impulses.
Yeah. I think in my mind it was initially like eat to a good point and like don't overindulge in food and stuff like that. But maybe, like you said, how temper makes you think of temper and anger. maybe it's controlling emotions as well. Like you get into a heated argument, or someone cuts you off in like your car or whatever. The initial urge is to get angry or to be sad or to do this and do that. Whereas temperance is kind of detaching, maybe.
Yeah.
And stepping away from yourself almost.
Yeah, the word is very similar to temptations as well. So perhaps what it is to be able to not give in to temptations. Perhaps,
yeah,
I can imagine they originate from the same like type of word.
Yeah.
So yeah, it means to not give in to temptations, and obviously that's something that needs to develop because as humans we are inherently vulnerable to temptation, and there is an urge when we do have the capacity to overindulge. Like that's kind of what our biological urges want us to do. Whereas temperance as a virtue is having the ability in terms of your actions to not do that.
Yeah, resist, and yeah, I think detachment definitely comes into it. I'm trying to think what else kind of is involved.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about a wise person, they're going to be someone with good temperance as well. You generally think it's very difficult to picture like your stereotypical wise old man, for example. Very difficult to picture them giving into kind of temptations and overindulging. And yeah, I think detachment is definitely an important part of actually having that in your life. You need to be able to not be so caught up in the urges when they make themselves known. And yeah, so yeah, detachment is definitely a fundamental part of temperance.
Yeah, I think that kind of encompasses temperance as a whole. It might be slightly different, the Stoic definition, but I think that's a good way of understanding it for us anyway.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And
justice.
Then, justice is last. I think that guy Ryan Holiday, Daily Stoic, I think I heard him say that it was Marcus Aurelius who, did we say this already? That believed that justice is the highest virtue and like the most important one. Would you say justice is as simple as saying doing what's right and making sure what's wrong is avoided?
Yeah, that seems like a good broad definition, because the initial thought of what justice is, like the thing I think straight away is kind of like the law and punishing people, like the court system, punishing people appropriately to bring justice. So I feel like that's kind of the way it's used most of the time nowadays. And yeah, so Marcus Aurelius thought that was the highest.
Yeah, I think
the most important justice.
I think he did. That's from the video I watched like a week or two ago. I think that's what I heard said. It's difficult though, because to do what is just is different in everyone's mind. Like we'll have different ideas of, is this true justice or is it not really getting to the point that we need it to get to? Like what an example be like going back to business and stuff. For example, the 2008 financial crisis, was it necessarily just that all these big bank CEOs went to court, were legally not pardoned but found legally innocent for their actions, but although their banks failed and millions of people lost thousands and thousands of dollars, they still got their bonuses, and they still got like $1 million bonuses, maybe $10 million bonuses, when other people were in financial fucking tragedy? Is it just?
No, that's definitely not just.
No, in terms of the law, though, it kind of is.
I think that would probably demonstrate a failing in the law, though. Like what the law ideally would be, offering justice in that situation, which would be, as you said, they're not rewarding these people for the terrible things they did and for the lives they ruined. That wasn't a just thing to happen. So yeah, the law does sometimes fall short of the virtue that it's aiming to provide.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, another example that's definitely, I don't know if anyone, I wouldn't say everyone's got a public opinion about it, but I think everyone kind of has an inherent opinion about it, like the death penalty. if someone does this atrocious crime, and you can think of anything, there's too many examples, unfortunately, but like, should someone be killed for like such horrific crimes, or is life sentence in prison worse enough? Like, what justice is there?
It's difficult. I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole there, but some people might say life in prison is worse than the death penalty.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's tricky to know what justice, and I suppose it takes wisdom to realise that justice. So, kind of going back to what justice is in relationship to these other four virtues. So it seems like wisdom is having the knowledge and understanding of the world. Courage is being able to perhaps the right thing, or just being able to do something in spite of fear.
Yeah, taking action without knowing the outcome.
Yeah. And then temperance is to be able to not give in to temptation.
Yeah, resist urges and stuff.
And then justice is justice to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. But perhaps because, it seems actually quite similar to what courage is, but courage focuses on
the self almost. Would you say?
Perhaps doing the right thing regardless of the negative repercussions to yourself. Whereas what justice focuses on is doing the right thing almost no matter what the consequences are broadly
on a human level.
Yeah,
like I might need to tell, like, for example, I don't know, maybe it's a silly example, tell my wife I cheat on her because it's the just thing to do.
Yeah,
the consequences of that are terrible for me.
Yeah,
I've not got a wife, just so you know. But like, that's just a silly example. But I think that's right. Courage is kind of more focused on the self, and that's important. And then justice is maybe, would you say justice is more focused on principles, maybe?
Yeah, I would say so, because I think, like you said, courage is more focused on the self, and I think, we spoke about how there might be situations where you can be courageous where you're not fearful, but it does seem like fear is most of the time part of making a courageous decision. But making a just decision, I suppose, but because when I think about what it would feel like to make a courageous decision, the feeling would be fear, but you do it anyway. Whereas making a difficult but just decision, like, that feeling would definitely be slightly different. It would be willing to, I feel like the feeling you'd need to overcome to make a just decision is willing to perhaps harm other people more than potentially harm yourself.
Okay.
But because it's the right thing to do, I'm not sure if that's. What do you think about that? Do you think justice,
I understand what you're saying.
Like if you visualize, like, you making a just decision, like, what is the difficulty you overcome during that decision?
Yeah, courage is focused on the self and how that action can kind of influence the outcome for you and the people surrounding you. But you're trying to do it, if you're trying to do something positive for those people and yourself, whereas justice, sometimes a just decision is going to hurt another person's feelings or reputation or
It seems like there's definitely an overlap, because you gave that example. If you told your wife you cheated on her, then that's a just thing to do, and it's also a courageous thing to do. But obviously not to cheat on her, but to tell her, given that.
Sorry,
Tate. No. Yeah. I forgot where I was now. But but justice, I suppose they can somewhat be separate, because justice, you're not necessarily doing something you're afraid to do because of the person. Maybe that is the distinction. It's the personal consequences, as opposed to when you're making the just decision, you make the right decision regardless of the consequences to other people. Whereas courage is more focused on yourself. Yeah, and obviously that comes with, like, quite a deep feeling inside. It seems with all these well, for three of them, so temperance, courage, and justice, is that they all have one thing in common, which is they're the act of doing something which is difficult, and they all have this aspect of overcoming a kind of tendency we have. So courage, tendency, what overcoming is fear.
Yeah.
Temperance, though, we're overcoming temptation.
Yeah.
And then justice, we're overcoming the difficulty in potentially harming other people.
Mm-hmm.
With that,
Would you say that's fearful as well?
Yeah,
it's just a different type of fear.
I'd say it's maybe a different type of fear, but then wisdom kind of seems to sit on its own, because it's this thing which is accumulated over time, perhaps through taking on challenges which require the other three virtues.
Mm-hmm.
You gain wisdom over time, but wisdom seems to be less of an action and more of a state of being, almost.
Yeah. It's like a mindset almost. Yeah, wisdom, although you can take wise actions, wisdom, like you said, it's you envision a person who's calm and collected and like goes about life in a certain way. It's not necessarily so concerned with their actions.
Yeah, but to be fair, like when you imagine a wise person, I do, like when comparing it to these other definitions, I feel like wisdom could almost embody all of them, because as a wise person, you would be
right.
You would have temperance, you would have courage,
like, and be just in your actions. Take these risks.
So it depends. I suppose it depends exactly how you decide to define wisdom, but obviously in this context, it's more focused on your knowledge and understanding of the world, whereas the others are more about overcoming specific things. But do you think wisdom is also about overcoming something? What are you overcoming with wisdom? Look, the first thing that comes to mind is stupidity.
Yeah,
that's what you're overcoming.
I'd say with wisdom, you're overcoming yourself. Like, you're accepting that you are flawed and that it's better for you to upgrade your state of being by understanding this new principle that you've acquired and acting it out. And it's like being a wise person is overcoming the person that you used to be to embody this new person that you want to be.
Yeah,
I think that's what wisdom encompasses.
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. Wisdom is the overcoming of your own insufficiencies, almost,
and not being afraid to acknowledge those in a truthful way.
Yeah,
because we all know that we're flawed, and we all know there's space above us to get better.
Yeah, it seems like truth is kind of a fundamental part of wisdom. So perhaps it's overcoming your insufficiencies and lack of knowledge through the acknowledgement of the truth.
Yeah. Do you think truth maybe plays a bit more of a role in justice than we mentioned?
Yeah, that's a very good point as well.
Courage is kind of focused on the self, but we can do things for ourselves that aren't truthfully good for other people. Whereas justice is more about, right, truthfully, this is the best thing, and it's going to be the best for the most amount of people. If you believe in utilitarianism, for example, but it's still going to harm some people.
Yeah. Perhaps in a way, justice encompasses the other three things, because we obviously, to know the truth, you need to be wise. So in order to know what is just, that requires wisdom. And we mentioned, comparing the differences between courage and justice, that justice has this element of overcoming fear as well. And then I don't know if there's an element of justice which temperance comes into. Your ability to control your temptation to let people off with things.
Yeah, not flipping out at people, not giving into the urge of just fucking going at someone or fighting someone or whatever, because it's the just thing to do.
Yeah, because I suppose with justice, I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of being able to punish people even if you don't want to, but it's also letting people go even if you want to punish it. So it goes both ways. Yeah. So you think about justice with the law, like we need to deliver justice, send him to jail, but justice is also not sending someone to jail if they're not guilty.
Yeah.
So yeah, so perhaps the courage is to do what's difficult because it's right, and well, to do what's the courage would be to punish someone because it's the right thing to do, but you're scared to do it because obviously you don't want to harm as a human, you don't want to harm another human. But if that turns out to be the just thing to do, then you need to do that anyway. And then temperance in terms of justice would be the ability to not punish someone if that is a just thing to do. So it's being able to pull back.
Yeah. Even if you have the urge to.
Yeah. And then wisdom kind of underlies both, because with wisdom you're able to know what's right and wrong, and with the knowledge of what's right and wrong you're able to know what justice is.
Yeah. I guess that kind of, would that sum up how you would rank order the 4 virtues almost? Would you put justice at the top?
Nah, well, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't necessarily, because it's difficult to say, because thinking about how much these virtues matter, it almost matters at different amounts at different points in life. So I feel like earlier in life, temperance and courage are probably the most important things, because there's no wisdom. It's because wisdom takes time to build. You can't just act out wisdom.
Yeah.
You need to have a certain level of knowledge and understanding of the world, which comes with time and experience to gain wisdom. But temperance, the ability to control yourself, and courage, the ability to do things even though you're afraid, or even though it might not work out for you because you think it's the right thing to do. Like, those things perhaps matter more in life. But then ultimately you want to gain wisdom, and then once you have all 3, that's perhaps the point where you're able to deliver justice.
Yeah.
It's hard to rank order them because I feel like they're so intertwined. They're not separate things.
I would almost say initially I'd put temperance at the bottom. I feel like I'd know that for sure. I think I could easily put temperance 4th, and then the other 3 would be difficult to.
Well, what makes you put temperance at the bottom compared to the other ones?
I don't know. I feel like it's okay to indulge sometimes, and because I feel like if someone lives a courageous life and they take on challenges and better themselves, and then they're wise and they take correct action based on what they used to do and like their experience, and then they're also always just, I think that's okay. And then, but they indulge in things and maybe they flip out every now and then.
Yeah,
I think that's better than if someone didn't flip out at all, was very calm and collected and didn't give in to urges, but they were really unwise and made bad decisions all the time.
Yeah,
I think there's like having that as your bad quality seems to have less negative consequences overall in my mind.
Yeah, it seems like the other ones are potentially stronger forces for good. However, I feel like, just to play devil's advocate, to make the argument for temperance, I feel like temperance might be what leads you to the quickest demise if you lack temperance. Because you said it's okay to indulge sometimes,
right?
But perhaps what temperance is to not overindulge. So you're able to indulge to a point. And perhaps you may lack a certain level of temperance, and not overindulge. And overindulge slightly, but not too much. But I feel like, if you don't have temperance,
there's no discipline almost.
I feel like it almost is discipline. Like, if you don't, that'll probably be the quickest thing to wipe you out.
That's a good point.
Especially if, like, an example, you become successful, you have all this opportunity for pleasure in front of you. If you don't have if you don't have temperance, that'll just wipe you out straight away. Whereas if you think about the other 3, it's possible to be unwise, but that wouldn't necessarily wipe you out straight away. You might lack courage at one point, but that's not going to take you out. And if you make an unjust decision, then you know, the consequences of that could be big or small, depending on what it is. But it seems like, you know, in a way, temperance perhaps is, you know, I said courage and temperance were the most important starting things. Perhaps temperance is more important, but yeah, that's fair enough. Putting it last in this, maybe
No,
I would as well.
you've changed my mind.
I mean, I don't know what other, because obviously they've all got a lot of positive benefits to them. I don't know what else I'd put at the bottom of the list as a thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It seemed kind of easy for me to put wisdom at the top, because wisdom is just a nice word, isn't it? And like, to eventually get to a state of wisdom seems like you've tried different ways of living, and then you found the way that works for you, and then that brings with it a wisdom that works for you. And if you get to that state, I feel like you would have navigated through the other ones and kind of not accomplished them wholly, but you would have inherently explored each of the virtues and tried to get to a level where it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And then that's where you get to the state of wisdom.
Wisdom is at the pinnacle.
Yeah.
I suppose we've kind of, so I played devil advocate and said, you know, the argument for temperance being the most important was because without temperance, that's probably what will wipe you out the quickest.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
But I guess you've just made the argument for wisdom there, that in order to attain wisdom, you maybe have to navigate through them all, and perhaps by having wisdom, you will ultimately have all these other principles. I guess it comes back to your definition of wisdom, but you know, so Marcus Aurelius advocated. He advocated justice.
Super Bowl lads.
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius, justice over everything. No, he wouldn't do that. Yeah, he would be too intelligent with his resources to waste it on such a vain thing. But yeah, justice. So he says justice is the most important thing. What do you think would be the argument for justice? I suppose I kind of presented it by talking about how all three of the virtues kind of fall into justice.
I feel like how we discussed earlier, that justice is kind of doing the right thing for the people around you. My explanation of why wisdom could be number one was focused on the individual and what works for them.
Yeah.
But if we're living a life that we live as a human, we're gonna have to have that societal connection and be involved with our community to live a healthy and happy life. And you need to do what's right for the community. So maybe that's why justice is the most important, because it's doing what's right.
Yeah.
Based on principles that serve everybody.
Yeah.
And because if you're not serving other people, what's the point in just living for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like, because the thing with justice, you can make a just decision. I guess it depends on the value system, because if the value system is correct, you know, it depends on your value system, because certain people their value system is to value like short-term pleasure over everything, for example. But let's say what justice would be to give as many people an optimal life in the long term as possible.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the aim which the principles stem out of. I think it's possible to make a just decision which actually hurts everyone around you in the short term.
Right, yeah.
But it's still the right thing to do because you're acting in accordance with those principles. But I suppose when you talk about, you know, to make the argument for justice being the most important thing, it's being able to act out those principles and do what is right regardless of anything else. And perhaps, you know, he put it at the top because it is the act of doing what's right. Perhaps wisdom is knowing what's right, and then justice is doing what's right.
Yeah.
And maybe that doing and executing that in the world is the most important thing.
Yeah, but to do that you need courage, don't you?
Yeah, they're also intertwined. So I suppose we can move on to our argument for courage. A part of me does like the idea that courage would be the most important thing, because I feel like perhaps it's how I mentioned that the other things perhaps temperance is a quality which you could simply you can act out right away, but I feel like courage, it is the decision to pursue what you believe to be right. I think the difference with courage is when you make a courageous decision, it doesn't necessarily mean that your decision is right, but you're doing it, that there's an act of self overcoming in that even if your decision is wrong, it's a means of gaining wisdom, as we mentioned. And I think as an initial thing, to have the courage to pursue the highest good regardless of the personal consequences, I feel like in some way is the most fundamental thing. It's what needs to, it's how
the base of every
starts.
action almost.
Yeah, it's a basis of gaining the other virtues.
Yeah,
but you might not say it's the most important one, because you might say, okay, that starts you, but if we're going to have a debate over which is the most important virtue, it's going to be the one which ultimately you put at the pinnacle. So yeah, it's difficult.
It is very difficult.
Shall we rank order them then?
Yeah.
Let's just be brutal about
it. Right, let's give 5-10 seconds to get it in our own heads, and you'll say yours and I'll say mine.
Okay.
Or we'll go one. We'll go 4, and then we'll both say each other ours. Then we'll go 3 and say each other's. Let me have a second. Right, I think I'm ready.
So I think I know what my number 4 would be, and that is probably the same as yours, because you just said like temperance. I think
I'd
it's
go temperance.
Just, I made the argument for it, but I think ultimately the level of good that you can achieve with the other ones, there's more capacity for good, whereas this one is almost more of the baseline thing, which it's a necessity, but it's not what will take you
to the highest value.
Yeah.
That's sort of for everything. Yeah. Okay, so that's 4 temperance.
4 temperance.
Agreed on that. Number 3.
3. This is 3's tough.
I think mine would be. I think mine would be courage.
Yeah. So I'm struggling to define the rest of the 3. Yeah, I'd say justice or courage.
I was going to do justice or courage.
Yeah.
Oh no, your number 1 is then.
Yeah, but the number 1 would probably be wisdom, because I feel like ultimately, like as you mentioned, that is probably at the pinnacle of all 3.
Yeah.
And in a way, depending on how you define wisdom, that could actually embody all 3. And you think about a wise person, they would embody all these virtues.
Yeah.
And wisdom, it's hard to put. I feel like it's difficult to put justice above wisdom. Maybe there's an argument for it, but you can't have justice without wisdom, because you don't know the truth.
Yeah.
But you could also make the argument that justice is at the pinnacle, the same way like courage, although that's needed in the beginning, wisdom would be higher than it.
Yeah.
Perhaps the reason you have the knowledge in the first place from the wisdom is ultimately for justice. Justice is the ultimate aim to execute. That's the actions, executing the right actions in the world. Whereas wisdom perhaps comes before that.
I don't know, but I feel like wisdom is maybe more important, because justice changes over time for different people, and it's being a wise person is understanding that you can't get stuck in your ways, and the principles that you believe in now that direct your idea of justice could change, and wisdom is kind of accepting that you might be wrong now, but you believe you're right, so you'll do that. But in the future, you need to be wise enough to accept you were wrong and move on from that and change.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I put wisdom at the top.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah, I think I basically agree with you on the list. I feel like courage, it resonates with me that courage would be, one of the most important things. And obviously all 4 of these things, like they're the 4 Stoic virtues that they believed you should live by. But But yeah, courage, perhaps, you know, it will get you so far. But if you want to become like the ultimate embodiment of the stoic virtuous person, or you know, the higher man, or however you want to put it, you know, you need like justice and wisdom would probably be more important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can definitely, because I wouldn't have said justice is the most important thing at the start of this discussion, but I can definitely see why Marcus Aurelius would ultimately put that at the top.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll have to go away and see if I can find his reasoning for it. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
And read what he said.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the next topic then?
Yeah, so we've talked about those 4 virtues. We've tried to rank order them. I'm guessing that order could change over time, but to kind of get into some real life examples that kind of involve these virtues. One tweet I saw, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, it was Jordan Peterson tweeting out, and I think I've discussed before in like the podcast how it seems like he's quite angry in the last 6 months. He just seems to be a bit more like volatile and stuff. He's probably got good reasoning for it, or he believes he does anyway. It seems a little bit over excessive to me anyway, but he had a tweet where he took a picture in Italy, I think it might have been Rome or Venice, and it was this really nice building, and then there was graffiti at the bottom of it, and it kind of ruined the aesthetic. And he's basically said, I don't know if it was a joke or not, because it's quite like...
It's like an offhand comment.
Yeah, he's basically said that he thought public flogging could be reintroduced, and it would dissuade vandalisers from graffitiing. And then he said, like, have a stick no thicker than a thumb. So that kind of, I don't know if that was like the punchline of the joke, or he was actually kind of being serious. Like, what are your thoughts on bringing back kind of harsher punishments for crimes in order to deter people from doing these crimes?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. Like, and then my initial thoughts on that is it's a little bit primitive, seems outdated in the modern world, but perhaps, you know, I do understand when people make the argument that as a society we've become too tolerant and perhaps we don't demand enough from people, and I've heard arguments that that's ultimately going to lead to the collapse of Western society because we're overly tolerant, and you know, there's no discipline or structure, and you know, like this is an example of like a tradition being destroyed, and ultimately, you know, with the lack of discipline as a culture-wide thing, and a lack of respect for the history of the culture, you know, that could lead to collapse. And you know, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know what I think about there being the harsh physical punishments with physical violence, because that seems to be actually a distinction that in the Western world we have. You know, there might be some underground shit where like the government, you know,
torturing people.
Yeah, but probably get the episode. I'd hesitate to say that just in case.
On these black sites in fucking middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, if it gets taken down, we'll get on Rumble anyway. So.
Yeah.
But nah, nobody watches anyway. If you're watching up to this point, leave a comment saying I don't know, but yeah, just thanks for watching, because
just acknowledge us, please.
You're a real one. But anyway,
but yeah, that's a good point though. There is a big distinction between Western democracies and kind of Eastern democracies, like Middle Eastern countries. On a daily basis, they'll be seeing some sort of public punishment. Well, I don't know if it's daily, but
yeah,
on a regular basis, they see someone getting like whipped or like fucking stoned or whatever, and they are kind of more disciplined places.
Yeah, it's difficult. It does, you know, I can to play both sides here, talk about both sides. So looking on the sides of why this might be a good idea, I think, you know, maybe the point Jordan Peterson was making was, you know, it would take such a small thing where you know, maybe he was implying that it wouldn't even really harm someone physically or leave any actual damage. It would just act as a deterrent, and because now we've just, perhaps we're in a place where we've just lost so much discipline as a society that even like a small deterrent like that might actually be necessary to kind of push us in the right direction in the long run. It's interesting because it comes back to decision talking about justice, and if justice is to act in accordance with what is right, and that is based upon the values of what is best, what is optimal for people in the long term, perhaps a small amount of punishment which causes someone to, I think about like a young teenager or something committing a crime, and then they have a scare with the police and that scares them straight. But perhaps like having little things which help scare people straight would actually be a positive thing for even that individual in the long run. But I think maybe what varies between different societies is certain societies are willing to sacrifice an individual's because they're willing to sacrifice an individual for the sake of enforcing punishments, whereas I feel like in the Western world, because and perhaps it's ultimately stems from like the Christian belief that underlies like what the Western world is built upon, is kind of every individual is valuable and sovereign within themselves,
right?
And this is something that we've taken kind of all the way, even now. Like you look at modern movements where it's kind of about the individuals having ultimate rights and freedom almost, and there's arguments about whether that's the best idea or principles to live by, but ultimately as a Western society we put the individual, so we're not going to we're not going to execute an individual to punish to deter other people from doing things. The most we'll do is because we want the optimal life for each individual, so you'll punish that individual as much as would help him to live a better life in the future. So there is a bit of distinction there, and I suppose it depends on the culture, because some cultures would be willing to sacrifice an individual. You publicly execute someone, there's no chance for that person to redeem themselves, but the deterrent is not to help that individual, it's to help the rest of the individuals in society.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and there's an argument for that. Like, I'm not saying I believe it, but I suppose what there might be a level of like what's the term, flogging, was it?
Yeah, so like literally, like if you have this stick, for example,
Yeah,
and you just get them to turn around, bend over, and you just whip them on the back with the stick.
Yeah, there's an argument that that level of punishment would even be optimal for individuals in the long run, as well as for wider society.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your thoughts on it?
It's difficult. Like the punishment, for a punishment to be a real deterrent, it needs to be severe enough to scare people. And like, if you're a graffiti artist, in this example, you might be able to get away with doing 10 different like spots and graffiti in 10 different buildings, and then on the 10th time you might get caught, and that beating might hurt. But if you're only getting beat and it hurts for a few days, and it's only every 10 times you do it, is it really going to deter you that much?
Perhaps. Yeah, I suppose that's what Jordan Peterson's argument is, that it would, that even such a small punishment, because it seems, I guess the argument is that there's no repercussions for these people, so the smallest punishment you give them would steer them in the right direction.
And then do you think it maybe sets up in their mind the idea that this punishment can escalate? If there's no punishment at all, they're not thinking, oh, this could get worse. But if they're getting flogged every now and then, they might think, oh shit, this could get worse if I keep getting caught.
Yeah. So maybe it wouldn't, or maybe it wouldn't be enough. And I could even see, like, if these rebellious type of people that are doing graffiti, they might see, like, if they've got this kind of philosophy of, oh yeah, fuck society, I'm going to vandalize stuff. Like, they might even see being physically punished, especially if it's not a severe punishment, as almost being like a
badge of honor,
like a badge of honor for what they're doing. So I don't know whether it would help or not, but
that's a good point.
Yeah,
although this conversation kind of makes me think about Nietzsche's idea, and he said something along the lines of, what was it? Punishment is the highest form of pleasure a person can experience.
Yeah,
and he talked about, like, to be said, like one of the really early episodes, that sometimes right-wing people can take Nietzsche's ideas and run with them quite a lot, because he definitely believed in like strong policing, and like public policing needs to be strong and apparent to everybody so they understand the consequences of doing crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And punishment needs to be enforced, and it needs to be public. That's what he said, I think. People need to see punishment in order to have it ingrained in their brains that this shouldn't be done or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important point. I think it might be necessary for severe crimes that there needs to be a severe punishment. And that makes me think of I think Andrew Tate in the Piers Morgan interview, he said, for all the knife crime in the UK, his idea was set up a desert prison, and it's fucking hot and it's shit and it's just terrible conditions, and anyone that's caught with a knife or anything like that, they just get sent there, and like there's no like if, ands, buts, or maybe. It's like cutthroat. If you're carrying a knife and you get caught, you're gone to this terrible place.
Yeah.
And that should deter people.
Yeah.
I think that kind of is a nice idea, but it disregards it, like the actual experiences of people who have to have carried knives, and like there's obviously conditions in which they live where they feel the need to do it. And if you just think that they're just carrying a knife for the sake of it, it's a bit ignorant almost. But
yeah,
it would deter a lot of people, I think, if there was a severe punishment.
Yeah, it would. And I'm definitely not an expert on this. I don't know too much about it, but it does definitely seem like I've heard that there's obviously a massive problem with muggings in London in particular, and like I've heard a lot of things where it's just not, people report the crime and just nothing happens about it. So there is definitely an issue where there is steps that need to be taken, and perhaps someone more on the left-wing side would argue that we need to do things to build up those communities. And it's perhaps because these communities are impoverished or disadvantaged in certain ways, that if you, instead of funding the police, you fund community development, and it would solve these problems.
And gentrified,
and I suppose on the other side would be the right-wing side, where strict punishments would deter people, and to be honest, the truth is probably somewhere in between those. But both are important, but it's a difficult problem to solve, definitely. But with this idea of why punishment might be useful or might not be useful, the thing I kind of think about, what is the danger of implementing like these physical punishments, and I feel like it errs on the side of tyranny and a tyrannical society. So perhaps you can go too far in the way of a free society where it turns into an anarchy, but on the other side it turns into a tyranny. So by allowing these people to commit these crimes and not be deterred, you're erring on the side of your society being an anarchy, and on the other side you're erring on your society being a tyranny. And what point we're at on that spectrum, I don't know, but I suppose the risk of moving back in that direction of stricter punishments would be moving towards a more tyrannical society.
Right. But that's, moving that direction means you are moving towards that tyrannical society. But if you're so far this way, it might be necessary to go that way.
Yeah.
Because you're not necessarily moving all the way to that end point.
Yeah.
You're just getting a little bit closer to it because you need to get further away from the other point.
Yeah. Yeah. So based on that, you look at Peterson's view of this, of what's going on, and he probably thinks we've gone too far in the direction towards an anarchy.
Yeah.
And too far in the direction of chaos rather than of order.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting though, because I completely understand what he means. Like when you've got these beautiful areas in the world and like they have so much heritage and culture, I think there needs to be a really real appreciation for what came before us and like how it's built us this path that ended up leading us to the point we're at. But I found it strange because like research which rule it was, and it's rule 11, and in his first book is don't disturb children when they're skateboarding.
Yeah.
And obviously skateboarding and graffitiing illegally is a bit different. Like there's probably areas where you can maybe express your art in like legal ways and do it the right way. And whereas skateboarding is just completely legal, although skateboarding, that community has a lot of hatred from like older people at times when they don't want people skateboarding on certain areas and different locations and stuff. But yeah, getting back to the point, I thought it was interesting because he advocates letting children skateboard, and like the summary of it was something like skateboarding is a way to explore danger and to learn to deal with risk and pain. I think that's very true. I think it is important for children to do that because they need to have that courage to face the challenges. Do you think graffiti is similar to that or not?
I suppose if you introduce flogging, then it will be a way of dealing with pain.
That's a good point, yeah.
But maybe that's what he would say in the first statement. Nah, I doubt it, but it's a funny coincidence, I suppose. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of differences there, is graffiti...
Because there is a certain danger involved in it, like getting in trouble with the police.
Yeah, I feel like...
Although there's not a physical danger involved like there is with skateboarding.
I feel like graffiti in some ways is inherently more rebellious.
Okay.
Whereas skateboarding is kind of this individual personal challenge, whereas vandalism or graffiti, but you know, we're not talking about graffiti in somewhere where it's legal. We're talking about vandalism here.
Yeah.
So vandalism is a rebellious act that you're taking against the society. It's not kind of this personal challenge that you're overcoming yourself.
That's true, yeah. Especially when it's just shitty tags and like it doesn't even look nice.
Yeah. So I suppose that's kind of where Jordan draws a line. Is kind of between skateboarding being individual task of someone pushing it, and you think about that rule. It's about not punishing people. Like you don't want to punish a kid who's actually challenging himself and doing something where he's trying to get good at something and he's, you know, showing some courage, back to the virtues in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to punish them for that. You know, that's an unjust thing to do. Whereas he obviously thinks it's a just thing to do to have stricter punishments for vandalism, particularly when it's on like such a monument.
Yeah, like we discussed it before the podcast, and I still believe it. Like, I think like every town or like community should have like an area for these graffiti and like these massive walls as murals almost.
Yeah,
because some of it's fucking sick. There's a place near where I live in Manchester, and it's like this. It's just like this pathway that kind of goes through like loads of bush, and it kind of connects like different parts of South Manchester, like the boroughs, and it's called the Fallowfield Loop.
Yeah,
and you'll kind of go through underpasses. And on each side, these huge walls, and it's some of the graffiti there. It's just so sick.
Yeah,
and it looks amazing.
Yeah, in Leeds, where I live in Leeds, Hyde Park, it's not the like nicest place in terms of like, you know, it's a bit of a shit area, but there's some really good graffiti there. Like just really artistic, really cool stuff. And it probably makes the area actually look.
I think it looks nicer. Sick.
Than it would without it.
There's some pubs in Manchester that like they'll have a wall and they'll get like a graffiti artist to do, obviously something that's tailored towards the pub, but like it just looks amazing.
Yeah. That's a good thing. I think I've seen that type of thing in Leeds as well. But yeah, that would be good, and it'd be interesting actually to see if that was available. How many of the people would still graffiti as in vandalism, because part of the culture is the rebelliousness of it.
Yeah.
But I wonder for how, you know, I'm not too familiar with like people in that community. I wonder how many of them are doing it to be rebellious versus just wanting to do the artwork.
Yeah, it seems like the people that do those shitty tags aren't the kind of people that would go out and express themselves on this blank canvas of a wall.
Yeah.
They're mainly they're two different types of people maybe.
Yeah.
One's a rebel, one's a
artist.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage artists, but
discourage.
Yeah, I suppose you don't always want to discourage rebels because, you know, rebels can overcome a tyranny.
Yeah.
But
it's like Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's a good point. What else do we have? So 1 second. Oh, yeah, we sort of kind of discussed it earlier, like the general idea of like what makes a good person. Is it someone that is in service to others, or someone that serves themselves?
Yeah, that is a good question.
We kind of said like how courage is almost we talked about how it's kind of more about the self justice which we put just above
The thing with courage, though, is part of courage might be to be willing to sacrifice yourself as an individual for the greater good of a community,
that's true.
for other people. So yeah.
But then aren't you doing that for selfish reasons almost?
I wouldn't say so. I think the part of courage which is focused on being an individual is the consequences of your actions you will receive as an individual, whereas the benefits of your actions you might receive as an individual, but isn't necessarily not involved in the community. So you can take a courageous action which sacrifices yourself to benefit the community. So yeah, in terms of what makes a good person, like that's a big question, and I guess these there's different philosophies on it, and people would argue over them, but these Stoic principles lay them out quite well. So someone who I don't know, does wisdom make you a good person, do you think? I feel like wisdom, is having that underlying ability. You have the understanding of the world in order to do good, but can you be wise and not necessarily be a good person? You have a good understanding of the world, but you don't use it to produce any good in the world.
I don't know, like we discussed earlier, how to be a truly wise person, you need to embody that in your actions.
Yeah.
So I would default to saying, if you are a wise person, you are a good person.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's difficult because everyone's idea of good is kind of different.
Yeah.
Although there is like a common consensus, what makes a good person, that everyone probably would agree on. But you can be a good person and not be a wise person. But I think if you're a wise person, you are a good person.
Yeah. I guess it comes back to your definition of wise. It's a tough question. Like, are you a good person? What makes a good person? A good person does the right thing. What's the right thing to do? I feel like that comes into this whole discussion about like moral relativism, because I do think there is, like, the truth isn't this kind of arbitrary thing that is a truth. There is true things that are true and that are right and wrong. Inherently, it's not just a completely like constructed thing. There is something inherent to life where there are right and wrong things to do, and I think like it's difficult to make that argument rationally, but I think anyone in touch with their conscience almost will be aware of that, and some hyper rational people might at some point be able to make some logical argument which refutes the idea that there's any truth if they go down the road of science, and that everything in the universe is just this like process of ongoing things, and if you break it down from that level, then there's no like right or wrong actions, because what does it matter when the universe ends anyway?
Right.
Like that type of argument, trying to argue it from a scientific perspective. But realistically, anyone with a moral compass and anyone who's in touch with their conscience knows there's a right and wrong, and people can delude themselves, but I think there is and in that right and wrong there is truth, there is things which are true and untrue, but within that there is an argument over people can have idea like this is the highest good to pursue, and other people have this idea which is the highest good to pursue, and which of them is true. It's difficult. So from like a zoomed out, very blurry perspective, it's easy to have like a big category saying this side of the spectrum is bad things to do, murdering innocent people, bad thing to do. There's no way, there's no philosophy which can argue that that's a good thing to do.
Well,
I don't here we go. And then on the right side of things, you could say, I don't know, like what would be right? I guess the opposite of that, protecting an innocent person from suffering, would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, everyone can agree on that.
There's general things, but in talking about what the highest good is, it's difficult to define. But back to so you kind of asked, like, in terms of a good person, are they focused on what's doing good for themselves versus focused on doing what's good for the community?
Do you live a life in service of others, or do you live a life in service of yourself?
Is it possible to really serve the greater community or the greater good if you haven't served yourself enough to reach a level of competence or a level of wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to serve the greater community if you haven't focused on that within yourself first?
I think there is. I think it is possible. I think that, though, that to serve the community in an even greater way and have an even greater impact, you would want to level yourself up first. But I think no matter what level you are at, you can offer some sort of service to other people. It's just that the quality and the extent of that service will be improved the more that you improve yourself.
Yeah.
But then, like, if you live a life just in service of others, there's no self-actualization. But I think if you live a life just in service of yourself, and it's in service of yourself based on principles that I think most people would have and that are right and just, I think that ultimately leads to byproducts that do serve other people.
Yeah.
Like if I wanted to just serve myself, I'd just cut off maybe, let's say, like extreme example, just cut off all my friends. Set up a business and just make millions and millions and millions.
Looks like a real solo podcast.
But in doing that, I'm making millions for myself, but I'm also creating jobs and wealth for other people.
You come back in a few years and invest in some better gear for the podcast.
Yeah. Get a Jamie on the go or something.
Yeah.
A little production manager. Jamie Shearsby Johnson.
Shout out.
But yeah, so, but then it's like, how important is that service? Like in that example, how important is that service to other people, creating wealth and opportunities for other people through my business or whatever? How important is that to me if I'm not actually connecting with those people?
Yeah. There's an argument both ways. So something I've heard Jordan Peterson say actually is if you don't know what to do with yourself, then just do something. Then choose to do something that serves other people, because you'll develop yourself in the process.
Mm-hmm.
But the same goes for if you were completely selfish and you wanted to live the optimal life for yourself. That optimal life is you're not going to have the optimal life if you're not surrounded with people. It's an essential part of life to be surrounded, to have friends and stuff. So like if you're a rich person with no mates, you haven't served yourself optimally if you've got no social connection. So in a way, in order to serve yourself, you need to some extent to serve other people, whether that be in some grand way you get the ultimate fulfillment through like philanthropy, or it could be on a scale where you offer value through building direct relationships with people, and those relationships give you fulfillment in your life.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of separate the two, but there definitely, are cases where you can make decisions which serve yourself in the sacrifice of other people. And, whether those decisions are right or just, I suppose it maybe depends on the circumstance. But
yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you're right in saying you can serve yourself in sacrifice of other people. I don't know if you could necessarily say you can serve other people in sacrifice of yourself, because ultimately I think if a person was to do that, they're sacrificing themselves and they're actually happy about that because it serves other people. So it's not necessarily a sacrifice that's so like tragic that it's unbearable because they want to bear it for other people. So it's, I don't know, it gets into that question, like, is there such thing as a selfish action? Because everything you do, even if you don't want to do it, you do it for someone else because it makes you feel better.
Yeah, it's a good question. But I suppose, like with that, you say it's impossible to really do something. Like if you decide something's the right thing to do, and through doing that you get ultimate fulfillment, it's not really a sacrifice. But like I understand that point, but like just because ultimately it's the right thing to do, it doesn't mean that the sacrifice you're making is trivial. And I think, you know, you could go as far as sacrificing your life for the highest good. And there might be a situation where, you know, you have the opportunity to do that, and probably something very few people will ever experience. But taking things to the extreme, what's the biggest thing you can sacrifice? Probably your own life, but which obviously isn't a trivial sacrifice. But I understand the point that if you sacrifice your life, but you're in favor, you're not necessarily doing it in favor of other people. Perhaps at a more individual level, you're doing it in favor of your principles. So your principles, you know, it's the idea of, you know, you let your body die so you don't have to sacrifice your soul. You don't have to give up your principles. You don't have to give up the ideal, the divine part of yourself, which has the ability to produce good in the world. You know, it's probably the right decision to die physically for the sake of that. And, you know, kind of a tangent here, but like, you know, that's a kind of a big part of religion, is thinking about like the soul as kind of this physical thing. But I think even from a completely like atheist perspective, you could view the soul as kind of the divine part of yourself, which has the ability to transcend the difficulties of life and to do the right things and to act in accordance with the truth. And that could be defined as your soul. So, you know, so yeah, this idea of sacrificing your body instead of your soul, like that's acting in accordance with your principles. And I guess if that serves the group as a whole, are you serving yourself? You're not serving yourself, you're serving your principles, which is more important. You're not serving your physical self, you're serving your soul or your principles. So yeah, I think both things are important. And I would kind of lean, like, in a practical sense, it is difficult because in a practical sense, I was about to say that I lean to the side of focusing on individual improvement, because that ultimately gives you the capacity to do more good for other people if you focus on bringing yourself up more. Like, I've heard this saying, like, you fill up other people's cups with the water overflowing from your own, or something like that. So that would be that idea that you need to create abundance within yourself, and then you can help other people. Whereas if you don't have that abundance, then you struggle to help other people. But from a way of becoming a more developed person, if you chose to do something, if you chose to partake in something which served other people, then that would ultimately, like Jordan Peterson has said this, you know, if you don't know what to do, then do something that serves other people, because you'll be helping yourself and developing yourself in the process. So there's different ways of going about it. But,
I think there's a danger though, like becoming this really successful person by focusing on yourself. When you get to that point of achievement, you'll have the ability to, and the abundance to help other people. And I think it'll be good to help other people, but on the like selfish like side of it, I feel like a person would get more enjoyment out of helping people they're close to. Like, I could become a fucking billionaire and give $1 billion to a charity and help 1 million kids in Africa or Asia or England or wherever. That's a great thing to do, and I think it's like necessary that people do things like that. But on a selfish kind of perspective, I'd much rather become a millionaire and be able to help my family and people that I'm really close to, and my like closest friends.
yeah,
because like you need to have those close knit relationships in your life, like you said, to have that sense of connection and stuff. Like, what's the point in helping? Not what's the point, but it's different helping someone that you can't connect with than really helping someone you can see the benefit firsthand.
Yeah, it's a tricky question whether it's right or wrong to prioritize what's close to you. So, you know, one of the topics you mentioned before the podcast, which kind of links into this, is about animal testing, animal testing. And I've thought about this myself in terms of like the ethics of whether we should eat meat or not. And it's like, at a certain point, you know, I can understand the philosophical argument that it doesn't matter, like how disconnected the suffering is from you, in terms of how it matters. So the suffering of an animal is just as relevant as the suffering of a human, one might argue, and so it'd be wrong to eat meat. But I think as a human, we kind of inherently, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but we inherently value more uh, the moral consequences on people close to us, and that could go all the way. So you might start with your family or very close friends, and then it might extend out to your local community, then it could extend out to the entire human race, and then even to other animals and organisms, or even the planet at the furthest level. Like, what have you got any thoughts on, like, whether it's right or wrong to have this level of prioritizing your moral actions for things which are closer to you and relevant to you, whether that's right or wrong, whether it's right to prioritize helping people close to you, as you said, which would offer you more fulfillment as someone who has the ability to help people, helping people close to you. Like, do you think that's better, and helping your local community versus helping the community on the other side of the world?
Yeah.
Like, it seems, looking at it from a far out perspective, that like it doesn't matter whether they're close to you or not. The amount of good you're doing is constant. But like, as a subjective experience as a human, like, it does seem that we have this inherent bias towards helping people that are close to us.
I think I wouldn't say it's necessarily morally wrong to prioritize those around you more so than someone that's maybe more in need but further away. I think that because the further away something is, the less certain you are about that situation and like how you could help that situation. Like, everyone knows the story of, like, you donate £1 to a charity, and realistically the amount of money that actually ends up getting spent on the cause for the charity is like 20p or something, because there's all this bureaucracy and shit. And it's necessary to get that 20p to the actual cause. But like, the further away something is extended, the less certainty that you have. And if I'm serving people immediately around me, I can be certain that I'm having a good effect. And I'm getting like the best value for my buck almost. Although it's not always purely economic. Like, there is like the moral side of it, where like you should help people that are more in need than someone who's less in need. But I can be more certain that what I'm doing is producing good for those around me. So I think that's like an argument I could see myself believing in. But then, like, it's probably more right to help someone that's actually in need. Like, let's say if my friends were just like minimum wage, getting by and shit like that, I could give them, like, a group of 10 people £1 million and help them set up their own businesses or whatever. That does a lot of good for them, and that could trickle down to other people. But that £1 million could help 100,000 people in another place. And they're actually living in like abject poverty rather than just minimum wage. Which is different, and it's worse. But then is that kind of focusing too much on the economics of it? Like, you also hear about people that live in these areas of the world. Like, I'm reading a book at the moment. This guy who cycles through the fucking like Europe to Asia, and he goes through Laos, and these people have, like, they don't even have beds. They sleep on plank woods in the fucking house, but they seem like the happiest people ever, because they don't need money. They just want to survive, enjoy their company with their family and friends, and then just carry on each day and doing that. And they seem really happy at times. So focusing on the economic kind of takes away from the human experience as a whole, because we're not just economic clogs in the machine. We also like experience life in different ways. So it's hard to know.
It's hard to know. It's difficult. It's hard to quantify these things, and you can try and, when you talk about it from a philosophical perspective, you try to be rational about it, but there is something about our subjective experience as humans which matters, and perhaps there's an argument that you could be morally justified in prioritizing the benefit of yourself and those close to you over people that you're completely disconnected to, or but perhaps there's some justification for that, and perhaps you're not necessarily as responsible for those things which are so disconnected from you as you are responsible for those things which immediately affect you, which could be yourself, or the people close to you, or your local community. But
maybe my belief would actually be there needs to be a minimum standard for everyone in the world, and once you've achieved that, then you can help the people closest to you. Like there's still millions, if not a billion or two, people that live in like extreme poverty, and they're faced with these daily challenges of death, disease, and like just inhumane conditions. If we can get rid of that and have a minimum standard where people have that minimum quality of life that sets them up for a good life, hopefully, then it would be right to just focus on your people around you. Maybe.
Yeah, it's difficult because, I mean, I'd say it's maybe a rabbit hole we don't necessarily need to go down talking about whether it's actually possible for like world hunger to be solved or whatever, because obviously we're not experts on that type of thing. But yeah, it's interesting talking about it from philosophical perspective, whether there is, whether the distance you are from a moral good changes the amount of responsibility you have to fulfill it. I don't know. It's a good question, but
one to be answered in the future.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, we briefly mentioned animal testing.
Yeah.
Initially coming into this conversation, I was going to say maybe it's wrong, and then you mentioned eating meat, and I'm a strong advocate for eating meat, and I think maybe it's a bit of a superior like identity complex or whatever, but I do think animals serve the world. The animals serve other animals, including humans, by being the food for them. So I think it's right and just that we do eat meat.
Yeah, there's an argument that it's the circle of life, and perhaps from a philosophical perspective, you could also argue, and I'd say I do kind of resonate with like the philosophical side of like the vegan debate in terms of like the suffering of animals, but obviously I do eat meat myself, and but that's an example of where I'm prioritizing. So I believe in order for me to make that decision, perhaps I believe it's better for my health or performance, and also it's just a preference of mine. So my individual health and performance, I value that higher than the suffering of animals.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and it's harsh to say, and maybe that's wrong, and I'd be open to criticism in that realm. But but when I think about it, I'm not sure. I have some intuition that when you're so far disconnected from it, that you maybe don't have the same moral responsibility, and to abstract it so far out to think, oh, you harm these animals because you eat them. It's like, people make arguments against vegans like, oh, if you eat, I don't know, avocados or something, for example, I've heard, I don't know exactly about it, but there's a lot of suffering of animals, and even
I think it's even soybean like plants. They just kill every rodent, squirrels, rabbits, and birds. Everything just gets killed.
Yeah, so you kill a lot of animals, and any kind of agriculture has some negative effects. And perhaps there's an argument to do what you can to minimize those negative effects, but also maybe people don't have the right to put it on other people to say you should be morally responsible for this thing, when there's all kind of harm we do to different things on a daily basis, and we can't take into account absolutely everything. And depending on your values, and as humans with subjective experience, there's an argument we should focus more on that which is closest to us. And but who knows? I might have pissed off some vegans there. I know one or two. So
yeah, I think it's, I don't know if you could call it morally right to eat meat, but I think it's morally justifiable maybe. But in terms of animal testing, like cosmetically, I think it's wrong. But when you get into the argument of testing like new drugs that could be life saving, it's difficult to know.
Yeah.
Like, should we just go straight to testing on humans, or I don't know, the negative consequences of a drug not working on a human, it seems so much worse than if a drug didn't work on a rat or a chimp.
Yeah.
And that's just because we're human, so we have biases towards us.
Yeah, it's interesting because even a chimp, like, we'd value, because chimps are closer to us in like the ancestral tree. So we'd think harming a chimp is worse than harming a rat.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's also due to intelligence. So there might be an animal which is further away, let's say like a dolphin. You'd even though dolphins are further away from us than rodents are. Probably similar, actually.
Rats are really clever, apparently. But I know what you mean. Like, even though we're not genetically close to a dolphin because it's so smart, harming that seems worse than harming, and I don't know, like a monkey. That's just really stupid.
To be fair, I'm not. It's possible they're actually quite similar distance away, because I think it was some like rodent-like creature, because obviously dolphins are mammals. There's some like rodent-like creature that went off into the sea and eventually became the dolphin. I believe that to be true, or maybe it's more like some sort of rodent or dog-looking thing. But maybe we probably are closer to rats, but that it might not be true. Anyway, doesn't. But yeah, so that's the point. But yeah, certainly for cosmetic purposes, it's maybe difficult to justify killing animals for cosmetic purposes, but for health for health purposes, I suppose it's if you're able to if you're able to hypothetically save a human life, maybe you are justified in sacrificing some rodent lives.
How many rodent lives?
I don't know. That's a good question. How many rodent lives are worth a human life?
Maybe like 50 million. Billion.
Fuck them rats.
Yeah, difficult. Or then, like, do we just let Mother Nature do its thing and like stop pursuing these new drugs because it's just part of the cycle of life? Like, if I'm willing to eat meat because I believe it's a cycle of life and meat animals serve us as food, then I should also allow myself to be served up to Mother Nature and face the forces that she puts before me.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument.
But then it's also natural to try and mitigate that, because birds make nests.
Yeah,
animals fight off predators.
As a species, you do what you can to survive, and if we have the ability to survive for longer,
fuck it.
Yeah. If they were smart, if rats are smart enough, they'd do it.
They'd do it to us. Yeah.
But perhaps as humans, because we have this intelligence and this consciousness, which is seemingly beyond any other animal, and certainly an ability to make changes in the world, that perhaps comes with responsibility to make more moral decisions. But yeah,
difficult one. Had that last point, but we can maybe save that for another one, because I don't know if it really links into these sort of virtues.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's
been a good episode.
Yeah.
Would you say you've changed your ordering of the other virtues, or should we?
I'm not sure. I'm happy with how we put them.
Yeah. So fourth, we've kind of got temperance. Third, we've got courage, and then close second, justice.
Yeah.
And wisdom seems to be the one we hold the highest.
Yeah. So.
I think wisdom will most likely stay first for me, and temperance will probably stay last. Courage and justice is where I find it tricky.
Yeah, I found that a little bit tricky as well. But ultimately, I do think justice is perhaps slightly more aligned with the truth ultimately, and so I think justice probably above courage for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys, for listening. Hope you enjoyed. If you stayed around to this long, leave it in the comments. Shout out. That joke. But yeah, so it is currently 8:21 in the evening. Same day, same date. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, K-Lock. We'll see you all next time.